Jones.
Friends, brothers, sisters, it's chuffed to see so many here on a Tuesday night, not least because the football's on. It's 0-0, if you're wondering. I'm chuffed as well. I think for the third time in a month to share a platform with Tony Benn. I've done it each time, Tony, I'm going to embarrass you again. But you remain as much of an inspiration for our movement and a whole new generation of radicals as you ever have. And Tony, back in the day, he's often today patronised even by those on the right as a national sweetheart. They threw everything at him in the early 80s, the most dangerous man in Britain, they said. It should always remind us of what people at the top, the lengths they will go to when they are faced with a threat. And as I say, Tony, you inspire all of us today. Friends, when the coalition came to power, they smeared and attacked us as deficit deniers. But we have been vindicated on every single point. Not that we can take any joy for that, given the devastation that is now hammering our communities right across Europe and of course here in Britain. On jobs, they said there'd be a private sector-led recovery, and yet of course more private sector jobs have been destroyed and public sector's jobs have been destroyed, than private sector jobs created. Borrowing. George Osborne is now borrowing tens of billions of pounds more precisely because of austerity. And of course, growth. Now I don't know if people remember at the beginning of the election campaign, Labour had this big poster of David Cameron mocked up as Gene Hunt from Life on Mars, smugly perching on an Audi Quattro. And it said, don't let him bring us back to the 1980s. But how wrong they were. This recession is far worse than the 1980s. It is worse than the last double-dip recession in the 1970s. It is more protracted than the Great Depression of the 1930s. You have to go back over 100 years to have a crisis as serious as that. Don't let him bring us back to the 1890s would have been a more accurate poster, though I'm not familiar with late Victorian fiction to know who he would have been mocked up as. But that's not the point. These aren't the measures they're interested in. They have used this whole crisis as an excuse to push policies they knew they would never have otherwise been able to get away with. Rahm Emanuel, at the beginning of the crisis, he was Barack Obama's chief of staff. He said, you never let a crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that, he said, is a chance to do policies which were not otherwise politically possible. That sums up exactly what this government is doing and what governments right across Europe are doing too. Whether it be the National Health Service, the privatisation of our NHS, which they know if they put to the electorate, which they didn't have the guts to do, they would have been absolutely massacred. What they're doing to welfare, what they're doing to workers' rights, hiring a multi-millionaire Tory donor and asset stripper, Adrian Beecroft, to draw up a charter attacking the basic remaining workers' rights we have in this country. I have to say then, he called Vince Cable a socialist, which must be one of the worst smears against the good name of socialism I've ever heard. But the reality is this, and this is the challenge facing our movement. As people's anger is growing, and the anger is growing as people's living standards deteriorate at the fastest rate since my gran was born in the early 1920s, they are trying to redirect that anger from the people at the top who caused this crisis to your neighbour down the street. They have tried to turn, since they came to power, the working poor against the unemployed over benefits, the able-bodied against the disabled, again over benefits, and private sector workers against public sector workers over pensions. It is the age-old tactic of divide and rule, and only a united movement, which we must build, can stop those policies of divide and rule. Because if they let our people fight amongst themselves, they will win. So we have to build that unity. It is one of the most important things that our movement can do. Now I want to just talk in terms of a coherent alternative. as Andrew mentioned, are working with Class, this new think tank, which Unite and other trade unions have set up. And it's not an abstract intellectual exercise. Unless you put together a coherent alternative, people will often feel resigned and helpless. There is no alternative, people will think. We have to give people the hope and the courage, if you like, the confidence to think that there is a coherent alternative. Just to talk quickly, a few ideas. Now, they say at the moment welfare spending's too high. That sounds a bit odd, but they've got a point. It's not because of a bunch of feckless scroungers watching reflections of themselves and Jeremy Kyle, as the right-wing media and politicians would have us believe. It is a triple crisis: the housing crisis, the low wages crisis, and the jobs crisis. Take housing benefit, that's absolutely right. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money is being wasted on housing benefit in this country. That's not going in the pockets of the tenants. That is lining the pockets of private landlords charging extortionate rents because of the failure of successive governments to build council housing and the abolition of the rent cap in 1988. Instead of wasting that money on housing benefit, we should be arguing to build council housing, to create jobs, bring down the welfare bill, stimulate the economy, and reduce the 5 million strong social housing waiting list in this country. We need to be talking about the low wages crisis. Now, tax credits are a lifeline for millions of people in this country, but let's be clear about what they are. They are a subsidy for low pay because businesses will not pay their workers properly. If we had a living wage in this country, we would save billions on tax credits and on housing benefit, because 7 out of 8 people on housing benefit are in work, but in work that does not pay enough to pay their extortionate rents. And of course, the jobs crisis. As that famous left-wing propaganda organ, the Daily Telegraph, pointed out just a few months ago, there were 22 people in this country chasing every single job. Now, we know the official unemployment figures is approaching about 2.7 million. Scrub that. As the TUC pointed out a few weeks ago, if you include people who are economically inactive, they're not included in the official figures, and the people forced to do part-time work because they can't get full-time work, which is exploding in number in this crisis, there are over 6 million people looking for secure work who cannot get it. And as Keynes said in the 1930s, whether or not you're a Keynesian or not, he said if you look after the unemployment lines, the deficit will sort itself out. That is a triple crisis we can talk about to bring down the welfare bill, if you like, but in a way which actually fights for the rights of people, not kicking the people and making them pay for a crisis they had nothing to do with. Let's talk about tax justice. Now, Class, we've just done an opinion poll, and we put a number of policies to the British people, and we experimented with some of the policies François Hollande has done in France. For example, the 75% tax on those earning £1 million or more. Now, nearly 60% of people, this is a YouGov poll, supported that policy, including over 4 out of 10 Conservative voters. That is a mainstream, moderate, centre-ground policy, if you like. Again, they backed a massive house building scheme, and as well as using the banks, which were bailed out, and let's be clear about what happened with the banks. New Labour nationalised the debts, and they privatised the profits. We, the people, do not have control over the banks, which we had to save with our money. And that is why that poll shows the vast majority wanted to use the banks to boost those parts of the economy we want to boost. Let's talk about an industrial strategy as well. Now, if you look at Germany, for example, they didn't have the same approach New Labour and the Tories had, where you let the market decide, the state doesn't pick winners or losers. Let's talk about investing in green-collar jobs, for example. Hundreds of thousands of environmentally friendly jobs which can tackle the environmental crisis and tackle the jobs crisis too, and have a strategy of growth. And let's talk as well, and it's seen as on the front of the Times today, about tax avoidance, which displays a bit of chutzpah coming from the Times, given they're actually run by a bunch of tax avoiders. The point is, we hear a lot about benefit fraud. It does actually exist. It's less than 1% of welfare spending, about £1.2 billion a year. Compare that to the 25 billion at least, which the people at the top get out of paying through their tax avoidance scheme. People like Sir Philip Green, who's registered his company under his wife's name in Monaco, he's frankly taking the piss. And in doing so, these people don't pay the money that they have to, but you never hear the media campaigns vilifying generally the big corporations who avoid those taxes. But I want to just end by talking about this, because, and I'm glad actually with this great platform, it hasn't been about despair, because there is hope. More hope than since Lehman Brothers came crashing down 4 years ago, when we thought at the time would be a big opportunity for the left, and yet became the biggest opportunity neoliberalism has ever had. The tide is turning. The winds have shifted. Those high priests of austerity in France and in Greece got a damn good kicking. And we look to the Greek people as an inspiration for all of us. And where the Greek people set the example, we will follow. And I hope all of us look at what happened, despite the disappointment of Syriza not winning. The fact is, those arguments are finally winning. Now, what we need to do, above all, is unite all of us together, because we are up against the government with no mandate. I actually remember the last time the Tories won a general election in this country. Just about. Because I was 7 years old, it was back in 1992. I remember because my teachers getting dressed in black. They only got 36% of the vote in the last election, despite the fact it was handed to them on a plate. They don't have a mandate for what they are doing. Now, I think if we build together, organise around the coherent alternative, link our struggles together, then I think we can turn this around. We stand together, we fight together, and we'll win together.